Hello everyone and welcome to our Mario vs. DK discussion. I'm joined by Andre because he has just played a ton of the game. As a matter of fact, he's beaten it, including the post-game, and we're here to talk about his review verdict on it. But first off, Andre, is this game worth $50?
Oh, that's a loaded question there, Tom. If I had to answer that right now, for me personally, no. It's not a $50 game. It's still a pretty good game, one that I had fun with while playing it, and there's like no major mistakes, no major problems with this game. But at the end of the day, it's like I'd probably rather spend the $50 somewhere else. And especially just because it's, for those who don't know, this is a remake of a 20-year-old GBA game. It looks amazing. They really did a great job updating all the visual assets. But gameplay-wise, it's basically the same as before with a couple of new additions like co-op and a casual difficulty option. And a couple of new worlds it threw in there too. But it's really basically the same core game. So if you played that before, if you still own that game, or if they ever made it available on NSO, as they should in the GBA app, there really wouldn't be a whole lot of reason to revisit this game unless you really either want to see it in much better graphics and audio, or if you want to play it in co-op. Those are the main things here, and it's still a solid core base, but at $50, that's a pretty big ask for a 20-year-old GBA game, effectively.
Okay, well, 20 years old, not all of us were born in 2004. I'm younger than that. So, moving on, how does this game actually play for people who might be new to it?
Yeah, so in case, I guess for those who are new to it, they wouldn't know my point of comparison, which would be Donkey Kong 94, an original Game Boy sequel to the original Donkey Kong arcade game that was basically a puzzle platformer. This game is essentially a sequel to that, at least in terms of gameplay, where you're largely playing these single screen, maybe a little bigger than single screen environments, as you try to work your way through, collect the 3 presents if you can, and make it to the goal by grabbing a key and using it to unlock the door. So, in order to do so, you need to navigate through environments like these really tight environments with enemies and other obstacles in the way, and you kind of have to think about your actions before you enact them to make sure you survive. Now I'm in many respects I'm making it sound harder than it is, because a lot of this game is a breeze, but there are points where you'll reach, especially in the final world, Twilight Town or Twilight City, whatever it is, where there are some nightmare scenarios, and that really slowed me up and really forced me to think about every move I made. And this is even more the case in some of the levels where you have to, a handful of levels where you have to navigate with a little team of these little toys with you that follow your every action and need to protect them and guide them to the toy box at the end in order to finish it up. And those can be a little trickier because you really have to think about everything you're doing as the toys mindlessly follow you. And that's even more the case in the post-game, so sorry, slight spoilers here, which really goes all in on the escort mission type gameplay, for better or worse. So yeah, it's a fun, enjoyable puzzle platformer that makes the best of what it's setting out to do.
Oh, escort missions, like a Yakuza game.
Yes, exactly like Yakuza, exactly.
Okay, but talking about the post-game though, how was this game remastered graphically? How would you say, how good of a job did NST do here on that?
I think they did about as good as you probably could. Looking back at the original GBA game, I will say I kind of forgot about how ugly it kind of is now. It had that early pre-rendered look to it, and when you blow it up, especially these days on a bigger screen, it doesn't look especially great. And I have to say, it is a little hard going back to it from the visuals of this new game, which is lovingly updated with full 3D graphics. You have everything, of course, remodeled, redone. The backgrounds look amazing. DK is incredibly hairy in the best way possible. I love how that looks. It does have a little bit of that plastic sheen that you might have recognized from the new Super Mario Brothers games, but they do a good enough job that it largely avoids the kind of soulless look that game had. Just overall, a great presentation, especially when it comes to the cutscenes, which you could barely even call them cutscenes before, more like a series of PNGs. Here they're fully rendered, they look amazing. There's only 3 minutes or so of them, but for whenever they pop up, they look just fantastic. So presentation-wise, it's better than it ever has been. Whether or not we really needed it, I don't know, but it is there, and for what it is, it looks great.
I think PNG might be giving those a little more credit than they're due, Andre.
Yeah, more like GIFs.
But in other editions, they added a casual mode to make it more accessible to new players and not quite as tough. What do you think of this?
The thing I don't like is that they call it casual mode because it's almost essential. So I will say I played the entire first part of the game, the main game, without using casual mode at all because I like to play as the developer intended. And in this case, that's with a very tight time limit at times. Some kind of occasionally touchy platforming, which results in you falling to your death or accidentally running into enemies more often than you might intend, and it can make the process of restarting the level frustrating. But I will say, in those events when the clock was ticking down and I was just barely making it, I'm like, this actually feels really good. Now, most of the time the game is, for me at least, I found it to be pretty easy. I breezed through most of the first 5 levels or 5 worlds without much in the way of major obstacles. But man, Twilight Town or Twilight City, whatever it's called, really cranks it up and really is when I got that sense of satisfaction and also frustration that the game sometimes plays into, especially with a time limit. So I only dabbled with casual mode a couple of times during it just to see how it worked, which in this case, it removes a time limit completely. It gives you basically 5 attempts per life, I think, where you can, if you fall into a pit or die, it resets you to a checkpoint, which is now added in casual mode, so you can restart without having to restart the entire level over. And I have to say, that was really nice, especially in the post game where they really, as I mentioned, go all in on the escort angle, and I found that really frustrating. So I ended up going to casual mode where it checkpoints both you and the toy following you around, and it made it much more enjoyable to me. And I feel like calling it casual mode almost does a disservice because when I hear that, it's like, well, I don't play casual mode. I'm a hardcore gamer. And I think what they should have done was call it something like, modern difficulty or, versus the classic option, which is, of course, still available and is still the default. So if you're frustrated while playing this game, try casual mode. It feels really good. It works great. It doesn't really dumb down the game much, in my opinion. But, like I said, I say that mostly for the post game. But for anyone having trouble at any point, I would highly recommend it. It's a good addition.
Yeah, and you were saying too, the amount of time in some of the levels to get through all the puzzles is not easy. It is tight.
Especially in the final world of the main game and also in several of the post-game levels, it is very tight. Often aggravatingly so. And actually, speaking of time limits, the key somehow has a time limit. So if you drop the key you need to get through almost every stage, it has a 12-second time limit. Now, if you're playing in casual mode, it adds a few extra seconds. And in some cases, those seconds are essential because there are times where you have to drop that key, and it is incredibly tight to get it back in time. Whereas casual mode will give you that extra boost of time that might help you get to where you need. And honestly, if it were me, I think they should just ditch the time limit for the key entirely, or at least greatly extended it, because more often than not, I found it interrupted my ability to think about this game in a puzzle sense, and more just made me feel really stressed about something that I was already stressed about with the other time limit you have constantly ticking down. So yeah, again, casual mode might be the preferred way to play for many people, if not at times, if possibly for the entire game.
Oh, well, sounds like a great addition then. And speaking of great additions, something I was curious the most about in this game is that it has co-op. Andre, how did co-op factor in this game? I know you played some of it too.
Co-op actually really surprised me. But I tried playing around with it myself, Sakurai style, both controllers in one hand each or whatever, or taking turns, and that seemed fine. But when I actually sat down and tried it with a friend, I'm like, this is actually pretty good. So the core gameplay is all the same. The levels don't really change at all, except what they do add is in every level, they add an extra key that one of the players has to grab. It doesn't matter who, but one of them has to grab it and the other player has to grab the other key because it can't hold both keys at once. Because the main door now has 2 locks on it and you have to unlock, them with both keys. And I was surprised, first off, what that added to the game, because it adds just enough to make it more interesting. But on top of that is the innate nature of how co-op works in this game makes it just feel quite different too. With how how both characters managing this environment at once, how one player can cause something to change for the other by stepping on a switch or something, or reversing conveyor belt directions, or creating platforms, or whatever it is. Plus, you can interact with each other. You can hop on each other's heads and have them balance each other around. So for as many times as there were opportunities to cheese level design, there were many others where I found the nature of co-op actually made it a little bit trickier to get through. Trying to have both players survive as he made it through and try to grab both sets of keys, to the point where it almost feels like a fully different game in co-op, despite the level design largely being identical. So that was actually something I didn't expect. I thought that was pretty cool, and I actually really encourage anyone to, if not play through co-op the entire way, do it again after you beat the game solo, because it does feel different, and I was surprised. It was pretty fun, but at the same time, also frustrating too at points. Sometimes platforms feel too small for both players to really be on them, especially because if one player hops, they're going to bounce off the other player's head. Or sometimes the screen doesn't always scroll when you think it might, or when you think it would, and you can't fully always see what's going on. But for as frustrating as it could be, I also found it to be just as fun. So yeah, co-op is actually a great addition, and they actually implement it pretty well. I just wish, the one thing I wish they had changed is there's no casual difficulty when you play in co-op, meaning it's way too easy to burn through your lives because each player, whenever they die, that costs a life, and you can find yourself in situations where you start a level with very few lives, and you're better off just burning through them so you can start off with a fresh slate of whatever it is, 5-10 lives. So
of course, co-op is not online, is that correct?
No, it's local only, right?
Yeah, so there is that too. But with all these additions, breaking that down, is this game worth $40 then? Like, should they have just left it as a Game Boy Advance port and had it on NSO? What are your thoughts?
You know, the price points are such a subjective thing, right? You know, what's expensive to one person for one game might not be for another. Like, if you love puzzle platformers, especially in the vein of the Mario and Donkey Kong games, which there's basically a whole series of, you very well might love this game. But at the same time, I look at other games priced similarly or even less than, even from Nintendo themselves. I think Captain Toad is even cheaper. It's like, I don't quite see the value proposition there. Captain Toad had basically as much gameplay, if not more, with co-op in a 3D world setting, and it's like, wow, it's hard to justify this cost in this game, especially when it doesn't include things like a level editor, which was seen in other sequels to this game, not in the original, but it's like, that would have been a great addition. That might have helped justify the $50 price point. And so at the end of the day, for me, even though I had fun with this game, it wasn't like that much fun, right? Whether I was playing solo or in co-op, I enjoyed it, but it felt more like a great way of kind of like just, you know, if you have like time to kill, this might be a good way of doing it. But you know, again, at $50, that's a hard ask to justify. It's a steep ask, and I can see why it was originally a mobile game, because it's a great game to pick up and play. I mean, it still is on Switch, but I play Switch more docked, you know, for that true console experience. And it's like, this, do I really want to be turning on this game of all games when I could be spending the $50 on another game that I think I might get more value out and more fun of myself? So I think, for me, I feel like $30 would have been a much more appropriate price point. And honestly, I don't even fully know why they remade this game. Like, it wouldn't have been at the top of my list of games to remake, especially because the original GBA game, you know, visuals aside, still plays fine, and should be on NSO. It's not on NSO now, clearly, because they wanted to promote the remake, and I imagine it'll be added someday down the line when they, you know, once they've eked out, or, you know, got all the sales they can out of the remake. But, you know, putting all that aside, at the end of the day, this is still a good game, still fun. Just, you know, be aware of what you're getting yourself into. You know, like, there's not a ton here. What you see is what you get. And if that's your style of game, hey, great. Maybe you'll love it at $50. For me personally, I enjoyed it. I'll probably won't think much about it in the future. The designers did a great job updating everything. But again, it kind of feels like one of those pointless remakes. Like, I don't know quite why they chose this game to do it. But it's here. It's good. And that's about all I can say. So it's fun, it's not bad, nothing really wrong with it, besides maybe some really tricky pixel perfect platforming at times. There were a couple hitbox issues I encountered, but it's generally a quick restart, and if you play in casual mode, it's really a non-issue. So yeah, that's pretty much it. It's fun. I'd give it a 7 on our new scale. I'm probably not gonna think about it again after this, and that's about it. That's my really long summary of this review.
Okay, well, 7 out of 10. Well, on that note, thank you so much for listening to this review discussion. Are you going to be picking up Mario vs. DK? What do you think? Should they have remastered it? Would you have been happy with the NSO port? Or do you wish there was something like a level editor in? Let us know in the comments. And thanks for tuning in. Until next time, everyone. Goodbye.